Hold up! Did y'all just see that? The crowd gasped, some shielding their eyes, others whipping out their phones. A hulking figure, instantly recognizable, stepped out of the shadows. It was Mike Tyson, right there in the middle of the mall food court. And he was staring, eyes blazing, at a group of skinheads who were harassing a young black woman. Racist gang tries to bully black woman, but they didn't see Mike Tyson watching. The air crackled with tension. What was Iron Mike going to do? Saturday afternoon, July 15th, 2023, precisely 3:15 p.m. The Crossroads Mall in Springfield, Illinois, buzzed with the usual weekend crowd. Teenagers gossiped by the fountain. Families strolled, laden with shopping bags, and the aroma of Auntie Anne's pretzels hung heavy in the air. Amidst the hustle and bustle, a young woman named Jasmine, a student at Springfield High, was trying to enjoy a quiet lunch at the food court. Jasmine, with her vibrant purple braids and infectious laugh, was a ray of sunshine. She was sketching in her notebook, oblivious to the drama about to unfold. Across the food court, a group of skinheads, their heads shaved and covered in crude tattoos, swaggered in. They were known troublemakers, notorious for their racist views and bullying tactics. Their leader, a hulking brute named Crusher Carl, scanned the crowd, his eyes settling on Jasmine. A sneer twisted his lips. He nudged his cronies, and they snickered, their eyes filled with malice. Carl and his gang approached Jasmine's table, their heavy boots echoing on the tiled floor. Jasmine, startled by their presence, looked up, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Well, Carl sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look what we have here. A little purple-haired thing polluting our clean American space." Jasmine's eyes flashed. She wasn't one to back down. "This is a public space," she retorted, her voice rising slightly. "I have just as much right to be here as you do." Carl chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, is that so? Well, maybe you haven't heard the news. We're taking back this mall, starting with undesirables like you." He gestured to his gang, who smirked and cracked their knuckles. Jasmine's heart pounded, but she refused to show fear. She knew she was outnumbered, but she wasn't going to let these bullies intimidate her. She stood up, her small frame radiating defiance. "You're not taking anything back," she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "This is America. Everyone has the right to be here." Carl lunged forward, grabbing Jasmine's arm. "You think you're so tough, huh?" he growled, his grip tightening. Jasmine gasped in pain, trying to pull away. "Let me go," she cried. Carl's cronies closed in, their faces contorted in ugly grins. They were enjoying this, feeding off Carl's aggression. One of them reached out, trying to snatch Jasmine's notebook. Jasmine struggled, determined not to let them have it. The scene was escalating quickly, attracting the attention of shoppers. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people looked on in fear, while others pulled out their phones, recording the incident. No one intervened. Suddenly, a voice boomed through the food court. "Hey, leave her alone!" Everyone turned to see a tall, muscular man striding towards the group. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, but there was something about his presence that commanded attention. It was Mike Tyson. His face was set in a grim expression, his eyes fixed on Carl and his gang. Carl, momentarily stunned, loosened his grip on Jasmine's arm. He turned to face Tyson, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "What's it to you, old man?" he sneered, trying to regain his bravado. Tyson didn't answer. He simply continued walking forward, his pace quickening. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, making way for the boxing legend. Jasmine, still shaken, stared in disbelief. Was this really happening? Was Mike Tyson about to defend her? Carl, realizing who he was facing, started to sweat. He knew Tyson's reputation. He'd seen the videos, heard the stories. This wasn't some punk he could push around. This was Mike Tyson. Tyson stopped just a few feet from Carl, his eyes blazing with fury. "I said," he repeated, his voice low and menacing. "Leave her alone." Carl hesitated, his bravado crumbling. He glanced at his cronies, who looked just as scared as he was. They knew they were outmatched. This wasn't a fight they could win. And then it happened. Just as Carl was about to make a move, a swift, powerful punch connected with his jaw. Carl crumpled to the ground like a sack of potatoes, unconscious. The crowd erupted in cheers. Jasmine gasped, her eyes wide with shock and gratitude. Tyson, his knuckles slightly bruised, turned to Jasmine, his expression softening. "You okay?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Jasmine nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." Tyson smiled, a rare and genuine smile. "Don't mention it," he said. He then turned back to Carl's gang, who were frozen in fear. "Now," he said, his voice turning hard again. "Who's next?" The gang members scattered like cockroaches, desperate to escape the wrath of Iron Mike. The crowd roared its approval, chanting Tyson's name. Jasmine watched, still slightly dazed, as the police arrived, sirens wailing. The scene was chaotic, but one thing was clear. The bullies had been defeated. And it was all thanks to Mike Tyson. But as the police began to take statements, a new figure emerged from the crowd. A tall, imposing woman with a stern expression. She approached Tyson, her eyes narrowed. "Mr. Tyson," she said, her voice sharp and authoritative. "I'm Officer Miller with the Springfield Police Department. I'm going to have to ask you a few questions about what happened here." Tyson nodded, his expression turning serious. He knew he'd done the right thing, but he also knew that punching someone, even in self-defense, had consequences. He looked at Jasmine, a silent apology in his eyes. He had helped her, but now he was facing his own set of problems. Officer Miller pulled out her notepad, ready to take Tyson's statement. The crowd watched, their cheers dying down. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to suspense. What was going to happen to Mike Tyson? Officer Miller, her pen poised above her notepad, fixed Mike Tyson with a stern look. "Mr. Tyson," she repeated, her voice cutting through the lingering buzz of the crowd, "I'm going to need a full account of what transpired here. While your intervention is appreciated, we can't condone vigilantism. There are legal procedures to follow." Tyson nodded, his expression somber. He understood. He knew he'd crossed the line, even if it was to protect someone. He glanced at Jasmine, who was watching him with a mixture of awe and worry. He offered her a small, reassuring nod. "Officer," Tyson began, his voice surprisingly calm, "I was just getting some lunch when I saw these individuals harassing this young woman. They were using racial slurs, threatening her. I tried to intervene verbally, but things escalated quickly. The big guy, he grabbed her arm, and I reacted." Officer Miller scribbled notes, her eyes never leaving Tyson's face. "And your reaction was to strike him unconscious?" "He was about to hit her," Tyson explained, his voice low. "I had to stop him." Officer Miller sighed. "Mr. Tyson, I understand your intentions, but we have laws for a reason. We can't have people taking matters into their own hands, no matter how justified they feel." Just then, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. It was Carl's gang, or what was left of it. They were shouting and gesturing angrily, their faces contorted with rage. "That old fool messed with us," one of them yelled. "He's going to pay." Officer Miller turned to her colleagues. "Officers, restrain those individuals. They're clearly involved in this incident." The police moved in, quickly subduing the agitated gang members. As they were being handcuffed, one of them spat on the ground. "This ain't over," he snarled. "We'll be back." Tyson watched them, his jaw tightening. He knew this wasn't over. These guys weren't going to just disappear. They were going to want revenge. He looked at Jasmine again, a sense of unease washing over him. He'd protected her this time, but what about next time? Officer Miller finished taking Tyson's statement. "Mr. Tyson," she said, "I'm going to have to ask you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. We'll also need to review the security footage from the mall." Tyson nodded. "Of course, officer." As Tyson was being escorted to a police car, Jasmine approached him. "Mr. Tyson," she said, her voice trembling, "thank you. You saved me." Tyson smiled gently. "You're welcome, Jasmine. Just be careful, okay? Those guys, they're not going to give up easily." Jasmine nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I will," she promised. Tyson got into the police car, and it drove away, sirens silent this time. The crowd dispersed, the excitement of the moment fading. But the tension remained, thick and heavy in the air. Jasmine watched the police car disappear, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. She knew Tyson was right. This wasn't over. Back at the police station, Tyson sat in a small, sterile room, recounting the events of the afternoon to Officer Miller. He explained everything from the moment he saw the gang harassing Jasmine to the moment he reacted. He didn't try to sugarcoat anything. He told the truth, even the part where he punched Carl. Officer Miller listened intently, her expression unreadable. When Tyson finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Tyson," she said, "I understand your motives, but as I said, we can't condone this kind of behavior. You could have seriously injured that man. He was about to hurt her." Tyson repeated, his voice firm. "I had to do something." Officer Miller sighed. "I'm recommending that you were charged with simple assault. It could have been worse, but it was still assault." Tyson nodded. He expected as much. He knew he'd have to face the consequences of his actions. As Tyson left the police station, he felt a sense of foreboding. He knew he'd done the right thing, but he also knew that he'd made a powerful enemy. He glanced around nervously, half expecting to see Carl's gang lurking in the shadows. He got into his car and drove off. The image of Jasmine's frightened face burned into his mind. He had to make sure she was safe. Meanwhile, at the Crossroads Mall, Carl's gang was regrouping. They were furious, humiliated. They couldn't believe that some old-timer had knocked Carl out cold. They were thirsty for revenge. "That old fool is gonna pay," one of them snarled, echoing the earlier threat. "We're gonna make him regret this." They huddled together, whispering, plotting their revenge. They knew they couldn't take on Tyson directly. He was too strong, too famous. But they could get to him through someone else, someone vulnerable. They looked at each other, a cruel glint in their eyes. They knew who their target was. Jasmine. They decided to pay Jasmine a visit at her home. They planned to scare her, to make her pay for what Tyson did. They wanted to send a message, a clear and brutal message, to Tyson. "Mess with us, and you mess with everyone we care about." They piled into their beat-up van and sped off into the night, their hearts filled with malice. They were going to make Jasmine's life a living hell. As they drove, one of the gang members pulled out a can of spray paint. He grinned. "We're going to leave her a little message," he said. They arrived at Jasmine's house late at night. It was a small, modest house in a quiet neighborhood. The lights were off. Jasmine was asleep, unaware of the danger that was lurking just outside her window. The gang members crept out of the van, their footsteps silent. They approached the house, their faces hidden in the shadows. The one with the spray paint shook the can, a sinister smile spreading across his face. He raised the can and began to spray, painting a large, ugly swastika on Jasmine's front door. Then he added a message scrawled in bold letters, "In our lover." They finished their work, their hearts pounding with adrenaline. They climbed back into the van and sped away, leaving behind their hateful message, a symbol of their racism and their thirst for revenge. Jasmine slept on, oblivious to the hate crime that had just been committed against her. But when she woke up in the morning and saw what they had done, her world would be shattered. And the war between the gang and Mike Tyson would escalate to a whole new level. The morning sun, usually a welcome sight, cast a harsh light on the ugliness that had been scrawled across Jasmine's front door. The swastika, a symbol of hate, and the vile slur beneath it, stood out in stark contrast to the cheerful yellow of her house. Jasmine, still groggy from sleep, opened her front door to grab the newspaper, a routine she enjoyed. But the sight that greeted her made her blood run cold. Her breath hitched, her hand flying to her mouth. The newspaper fluttered to the ground, forgotten. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. This wasn't just a prank. This was hate, pure and unfiltered, directed at her. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her, her stomach churning. She stumbled back inside, slamming the door shut as if to block out the hateful message. She leaned against the door, her body shaking. She felt violated, exposed. The safety of her home, her sanctuary, had been shattered. Her phone rang, startling her. It was her best friend, Keisha. "Jasmine? You okay? I heard about what happened at the mall." Jasmine's voice trembled as she tried to speak. Keisha, they, they came here, she finally managed to say, her voice choked with tears. They painted things on my door. Keisha's voice was instantly filled with concern. Oh my God, Jasmine, I'm so sorry. I'm coming over right now. Within minutes, Keisha was at Jasmine's door, her face etched with worry. She hugged Jasmine tightly, offering comfort and support. This is awful, Keisha said, her voice filled with anger. We have to do something. Jasmine shook her head, her tears flowing freely now. I don't know what to do, she whispered. I'm scared. Keisha took Jasmine's hand. We're not going to let them get away with this, she said firmly. We're going to report this to the police. And we're going to find out who. They called the police, and within an hour, 2 officers arrived at Jasmine's house. They took a report, photographed the graffiti, and promised to investigate. But Jasmine could see the doubt in their eyes. They'd seen this kind of thing before. Hate crimes were on the rise, and they were difficult to solve. As the police were leaving, Jasmine noticed a small, folded piece of paper tucked under her doormat. She picked it up, her heart pounding. It was a note. She unfolded it carefully, her hands trembling. The message was short and chilling. You're next. Jasmine gasped, her eyes widening in fear. This wasn't just about the graffiti anymore. This was a threat, a direct threat to her life. She showed the note to Keisha, who gasped in horror. This is insane, Keisha said, her voice shaking. We have to get you out of here. You can't stay here alone. Jasmine nodded, her mind racing. She knew Keisha was right. She couldn't stay here. She was too scared. Keisha helped Jasmine pack a bag, throwing in some clothes, toiletries, and a few personal items. They decided that Jasmine would stay at Keisha's house for a while, until they figured out what to do. As they were leaving, Jasmine looked back at her house, the hateful graffiti still visible on her door. She felt a wave of anger, mixed with fear and helplessness. She couldn't let these bullies win. She wouldn't let them drive her out of her own home. Meanwhile, at a seedy bar on the outskirts of town, Carl and his gang were celebrating. They were drinking and laughing, reveling in their act of hate. That'll teach her, Carl said, raising his glass. And that old fool will think twice before messing with us again. They were so caught up in their celebration that they didn't notice the figure lurking in the shadows, watching them with cold, hard eyes. It was Mike Tyson. He had heard about the attack on Jasmine's house. He had seen the pictures of the graffiti, the hateful message, and he had read the news reports about the threats. He was furious. He knew these guys were dangerous. He knew they wouldn't stop until they had hurt Jasmine, or worse. He had to do something. He couldn't let them get away with this. He watched them for a while, listening to their hateful banter. He memorized their faces, their voices. He knew he couldn't confront them directly. Not yet. He needed a plan. He slipped away into the night, his mind churning. He was going to make them pay. He was going to make them regret ever touching Jasmine. He was going to unleash the full force of Iron Mike on them. He drove to a nearby gas station and parked his car. He went inside and bought a newspaper. He flipped through the pages until he found what he was looking for, the address of Carl's bar. He folded the newspaper and tucked it under his arm. He got back into his car and drove off, his jaw set, his eyes blazing with fury. He arrived at the bar late at night. The place was still crowded, the air thick with smoke and the smell of stale beer. He parked his car a few blocks away and walked to the bar, careful not to be seen. He stood across the street, watching the bar, waiting for his moment. He knew he couldn't go in there and start a fight. Not yet. He needed to be smart. He needed to be strategic. He waited for hours, watching as the bar slowly emptied out. Finally, just before closing time, Carl and his gang emerged from the bar, stumbling and laughing. They were drunk, loud, and obnoxious. Tyson watched them, his heart pounding in his chest. This was his chance. He waited until they got into their van and drove off. He followed them in his car, keeping a safe distance. I wanted to see where they were going. They drove to a secluded area on the outskirts of town, a deserted industrial park. They parked their van and got out, their laughter echoing in the stillness of the night. Tyson watched them from a distance, his eyes narrowed. He knew what they were up to. They were going to do something stupid, something dangerous. He waited for a few more minutes, Then he got out of his car and approached them slowly, silently. They didn't see him coming. Just as they were about to enter an abandoned warehouse, Tyson stepped out of the shadows. "Hey," he said, his voice low and menacing. Carl and his gang turned around, startled. They saw Tyson standing there, his face hidden in the darkness. They didn't recognize him at first. "Who the hell are you?" Carl slurred. Tyson didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at them, his eyes burning into them. Carl took a step forward, trying to intimidate Tyson. "You got a problem with us, old man?" he sneered. Tyson still didn't answer. He just smiled a cold, chilling smile. Carl and his gang exchanged nervous glances. They could sense the danger radiating from Tyson. They knew this wasn't just some old man. This was someone they didn't want to mess with. Tyson took another step forward, his pace quickening. He was almost upon them. Carl and his gang panicked. They turned to run, but it was too late. Tyson lunged forward, grabbing Carl by the collar. He lifted him up into the air, his muscles bulging. Carl screamed in terror, his feet dangling helplessly. His gang members watched in horror, frozen in fear. Tyson held Carl up for a moment. Then he threw him to the ground like a rag doll. Carl landed with a thud, unconscious. Tyson turned to the other gang members, his eyes blazing with fury. They didn't wait for him to make a move. They turned and ran for their lives. Tyson watched them go, his chest heaving. He had wanted to hurt them, to make them pay for what they had done to Jasmine. But he knew he couldn't. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't like them. He looked down at Carl, lying unconscious on the ground. He knew he had to call the police. He couldn't just leave him there. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. He reported the incident, telling the operator that he had found a man unconscious in the industrial park. He didn't give his name. He hung up the phone and looked around. He didn't see Carl's gang anywhere. They were gone. He knew they wouldn't be back. The silence of the industrial park was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant rumble of traffic. Tyson stood alone, his breath misting in the cool night air. Carl lay unconscious at his feet, a testament to the swift and brutal justice that had been served. The other gang members were long gone, their bravado shattered, their hate replaced by fear. Tyson looked down at Carl, a flicker of contempt crossing his face. He had wanted to hurt him, to make him pay for the pain he had inflicted on Jasmine. But he knew that wasn't the answer. Violence only begets violence. He had learned that lesson the hard way. He knelt down and checked Carl's pulse. It was weak but steady. He was alive. Tyson let out a sigh of relief. He didn't want to kill him. He just wanted to stop him. He pulled out his phone and called the police again. This time he gave his name. He knew he would have to face the consequences of his actions, but he was ready. He had done what he had to do. As he waited for the police to arrive, he thought about Jasmine. He hoped she was safe. He hoped she would be able to overcome this ordeal. He hoped she would never have to experience this kind of... He knew he couldn't protect her forever, but he could make sure that these bullies wouldn't hurt her again. He would make sure of it. The police arrived a few minutes later, sirens wailing, lights flashing. They took Carl into custody and questioned Tyson about what had happened. Tyson told them the truth, the whole truth. He didn't hold back. He knew he would be arrested. He knew he would be charged with assault, but he didn't care. He had done the right thing. He was taken to the police station and booked. He spent the night in jail, a cold, lonely night, but he didn't regret anything. The next morning, he was released on bail. He went straight to Keisha's house, where Jasmine was staying. He wanted to see her, to make sure she was okay. Keisha answered the door, her eyes wide with surprise. "Mr. Tyson," she said, "what are you doing here?" "I came to see Jasmine," Tyson said. "Is she okay?" Keisha nodded. "She's fine. A little shaken up, but she'll be okay." "Can I see her?" Tyson asked. Keisha hesitated for a moment. Then she stepped aside. "Sure," she said. "Come on in." Tyson entered the house and saw Jasmine sitting on the couch, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked up when she saw him, and a small smile spread across her face. "Mr. Tyson," she said. "You came?" Tyson nodded. "Of course I did," he said. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." He sat down next to her and took her hand. "I'm so sorry this happened," he said. "I should have been there to protect you." Jasmine shook her head. "No," she said. You did protect me. You saved me. Twice. Tyson smiled. I'm just glad you're okay, he said. They sat in silence for a while, just holding hands. Then, Jasmine spoke. Mr. Tyson, she said, I'm scared. Tyson squeezed her hand. I know you are, he said. But you don't have to be scared anymore. Those guys won't hurt you again. I promise. Jasmine looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she said. Thank you for everything. Tyson smiled. You're welcome, Jasmine, he said. You're welcome. He stayed with her for a while longer, talking and laughing. He told her stories about his boxing career, about his life. He made her laugh. He made her forget about her fear. When it was time for him to leave, Jasmine hugged him tightly. Thank you again, Mr. Tyson, she said. You're my hero. Tyson smiled. You're welcome, Jasmine, he said. And you're my hero, too. He left the house and walked to his car. As he drove away, he looked back at the house, a sense of peace washing over him. He had done what he had to do. He had protected Jasmine. He had stopped the bullies. He had made the world a little bit safer. He knew he would have to face the consequences of his actions. He knew he would probably go to jail. But he didn't care. He had done the right thing. And that was all that mattered. The news of Mike Tyson's arrest for assaulting a group of racist bullies spread like wildfire. The public was divided. Some people condemned his actions, calling him a vigilante. Others praised him, calling him a hero. The case went to court, and Tyson was found guilty of assault. He was sentenced to community service and anger management classes. But the story didn't end there. The incident at the mall and the attack on Jasmine's house sparked a national conversation about racism and hate crimes. People started to speak out against intolerance and bigotry. They demanded justice for victims of hate crimes. And slowly, things started to change. Hate crimes decreased. Tolerance increased. And the world became a little bit better. Mike Tyson became a symbol of hope, a symbol of resistance against hate. He showed the world that even the most powerful people can be vulnerable, and that even the most vulnerable people can be strong. He showed the world that it's okay to stand up for what you believe in, even if it means breaking the law. He showed the world that it's okay to fight back against hate,